This is the whole process from start to finish behind producing, directing, and delivering no less than 8 pieces of content in 3 different variations shot over 2 days for a major car launch in Europe. And I'll even tell you how much I got paid. This video is sponsored by Audio. My name's Scott, a largely commercials and content director who sometimes DPs and happened to be heavily involved in the pre and post-production on this particular job. So there's a lot of nitty-gritty I can share with you on this one. It's not about what you know, but who you know, is what they say. But 2 or 3 years ago, someone that I don't actually know at an agency recommended me to self-shoot and direct a content job for a luxury luggage brand with a bunch of celebrities shooting all over the world. I ended up doing the whole campaign. And then they asked me to do another one a year after that. And then when the 2 lead creatives from the campaign moved on to other agencies, they then both recommended me for jobs there. This job, the one with the car brand that we're talking about right now, this is one of those latter recommendations. Once or twice over a couple of months, I had calls and more than a few emails with the agency producer, a very nice lady based out of Dubai. She said I was in the running and came with a good recommendation from one of the creatives at the agency. I wasn't gonna have to pitch like you would in the typical way, but I was one of a few different people being considered for the job. Then, when it was starting to sound more and more like I was actually gonna get the job, they told me that they wanted to partner me with a production company. They did share with me the entire production budget. But because I want to work with this agency again, and I don't know if they had any sneaky markups that might not have been divulged, I will keep that number to myself. But I will say that it was X, which is a fine budget in this day and age. A fine budget for a 1-day commercial shoot. But this wasn't a 1-day commercial shoot. This was a 2-day content shoot with a pre-light and 6 or 7 different deliverables. I was still excited at the prospect of making something real worthy and still getting paid fairly well for the job that I was doing. But I was also quick to point out, and I know a lot of industry types will hate me for this, but if they wanted a good end product and they wanted to shoot this amount of deliverables over 2 days with a pre-light day, and this markup would have been almost double what the whole post-production budget ended up being in the end. So we were really going to struggle to make something good if they wanted to go down this route. I know production companies and traditional industry types will hate me for having done this and probably say I'm part of the problem with the industry. But I wanted to make something good, or at least as good as I could do within the means. So I suggested, how about we run it through my production company? So we can use my insurance. I won't take any markup and we can hire a freelance producer to produce it, buying us back a substantial amount more budget to work with. Possibly because we hadn't actually worked together before, so the trust yet wasn't established. But the producer didn't jump at this idea. She wasn't particularly excited by it. But after some back and forth and me reiterating my preference a few times, they eventually came round to the idea. I'd already outlined a rough budget of how I thought it would work before even suggesting any of this, by the way. I then reached out to my 3 favourite freelance producers, all of which were already booked on other jobs. So I spoke to a couple of my favourite non-freelance producers to see if they had any good recommendations and eventually landed on Ersin, who came with a glowing review from someone who'd not actually worked with him directly, much like my own start in this whole chain of how I got the job. Ersin was available. I gave him a brief overview of the job on the phone, and then we got on a call with the agency producer. I caught Ersin up on the few crew members I'd already penciled, asked him to confirm with them and fill in the blanks. I had my first official call with the creatives, was given a more fleshed out deck of what exactly we were going to be shooting, and then a week later, Ersin and the visiting agency producer and I got together in central London to go over the details. Leading up to the shoot, I had a bunch more catch-ups with the agency, as different talent members were confirmed and the ideas became more defined. But from a production standpoint, the premise was pretty simple. Influencers, a car in a studio, 8 deliverables, and the finer details would all be revealed before we got to the shoot day. A couple weeks prior, Ersin, Callum the DOP, and myself recce'd 2 studio options. We picked our favourite for what we needed and waited anxiously for them to confirm, as we were initially second pencil on the studio, meaning that someone else had already held that studio. But most of the studios that were big enough in London for what we needed were even more expensive and have a silly, pricey and inconvenient arrangement that is not uncommon in a lot of large studios, where you have to hire all the lighting kit directly through them, the studio. So basically, they can make a killing and you pay through the nose for everything. The studio we wanted and ended up getting also has this silly rule. However, the studio is owned by the lighting company we were already planning on getting 90% of the lighting from anyway. And we knew they would be willing to do us a good deal and help us make our lighting budget work. As the director, I had a mini pre-production meeting running through the deck with the agency. And I'd also put together a small deck of my own ahead of this, outlining some of the shots that we'd be getting, some idea of look and approach, so the client was going to have a better idea of what the end result might look like, and raise any flags before we got to the actual shoot day. I should say that this particular client was very relaxed throughout the whole process. Fairly minimal art department was the only thing that was a little back and forthy, with the last minute addition from the PPM to get a custom made branded number plate for the car that I hadn't actually seen at this point, which was coming from mainland Europe on the pre-light day. This late in the game, this was pretty expensive because it meant a rush job at the printers and the art director sorting it all out over the weekend. So even though it wasn't that complicated, it wasn't just the £150 that it costs for the printers to make up the plates, but a full art director's day rate for the last minute inconvenience. Oof. Urson explained this all to the agency, and it was all billed as an overage on top of the initial budget though, because the art department budget had already been all spent and then some. Urson negotiated kit quotes, and we argued back and forth. And I say argue in the gentlest of ways about getting an AR op on for one day. Urson was adamant that we just couldn't afford it. So I put more and more of my own kit on the job for free to save on costs, and said I would swallow the cost of the insurance myself to make it all work. We had to have steady, and it wouldn't have been nearly as sexy without a great AR op. Pre-lights are still normally a luxury to me, but a very necessary one on a shoot like this, which could have easily been 4 more controlled, precise, stylized days of shooting rather than the 2 that we crammed full and made it all happen in. I prepped all my kit and headed off to the studio around 7 a.m, much earlier than I needed to head there for a day like this, especially as it was less than 25 minutes up the road from my house, but at least then I'd miss any building London traffic. Stage C at London Film Studios comes with a motorised truss, which is always a time saver for a setup like this. However, even with our heavily discounted lighting rental, we still couldn't afford to make this all happen the way that we ideally wanted it to. I say we, I'm talking about myself, the cinematographer, and Gaffer Will. So Gaffer Will had to get creative with a lighting list. Pre-light day also means a reduced crew size. Off-site, the first AC was doing a half day at the rental house prepping the camera. And on-site, there was the agency producer, myself, the director, producer Urson, a production assistant, runner, the DP, gaffer, 2 sparks, a rigger, and the production designer. We had a backup car that wasn't exactly blemish-free, but in pretty good condition, just in case there was any issue with the cars shipping from Europe, also because we needed something to be lighting. We also had an engineer from the manufacturer with us to run us through everything in the car and help us out if there were any technical issues on the day, because no one actually owns this car yet in the UK, and other than the creatives, no one had actually seen this car before. There was more talk about the props, some steaming, some eating, some more talking, and after we'd made a right mess of the Cove and almost all of the contingency was already gone because I'd pushed for AR when Urson was probably right and we couldn't really afford it, I ended the day painting with one of the runners because we couldn't spare the £150 the studio would have billed us to do it. It's not like I had much else anything to do at this point anyway. The 2 hero cars that we were meant to be shooting with that were meant to have arrived the morning of the pre-light still hadn't arrived by the time I was leaving that evening. But they were due to arrive in the next few hours, and someone was going to stay at the studio to take delivery of them, so they were all there and prepped, ready for shooting the next morning. I think I was actually home before 6 p.m, which is a nice way to end a day here in London. On my way to the studio, but it's the first day of the shoot, having had a pre-light, having had loads of prep, and the 2 cars that are coming from Germany. We've got 1 car, which is a backup car. We only need 1 car, but there's like these special tyres or whatever that need to be on the car. 2 cars were meant to arrive yesterday morning, they didn't. They're meant to arrive last night, they didn't. Supposedly they're going to be here by 10 a.m. today. We start shooting at 9, which is quite problematic for our schedule. And we don't have a first AD because we can't afford a first AD. Well, actually, now we could afford a first AD because turns out Urson was hiding some of the budget from me because he thought we were going to go over, which is a little bit annoying, but he was doing it for the right reasons. That's a bit lame, but it's part of the job, isn't it? You've
got to think of solutions. I went to sleep feeling very relaxed last night, which is normally a bad sign, but then I woke up feeling incredibly anxious, and that's probably why, because I hadn't checked my messages yet.
It was a classic stress for no reason moment. So the tyres were the issue. Apparently the tyres on the model of the car that we had that we were going to have to start shooting with weren't the same tyres that were on the models that were travelling to us. But other than that, they were pretty much identical, give or take a few scuffs and scratches on the stand-in. As so often on these sorts of things, it was made to feel like it was a much bigger issue than it actually ended up being, all because of fear of the client. But as I mentioned, the client was actually a very nice, normal, calm, non-overthinking human being. So when the cars did eventually arrive later that day and everyone saw that the tyres were pretty much indistinguishable from those we were already filming with, and honestly, when the main deliverables are going to be shown on smartphone screens, who's going to really notice anyway? We decided to carry on shooting with the car we already had. The day before the first shoot day, producer Ersin had sent out the call sheet and risk assessment. Now I know what you're thinking. What a hideous looking call sheet and risk assessment. Don't be so harsh. Ersin's not a designer, and he hadn't yet visited the kitbag.shop, where you can pick up these beautiful templates to save both time and silent internal ridicule from your own crew members in the future. For the first day, the numbers on set had increased some. We had a producer, a production assistant, director, 2 runners, a cinematographer, first AC, second AC, an AR operator, and a DIT. There was a sound op, gaffer, 2 sparks, just 1 person for hair and makeup, and 1 production designer. There was catering, and that's about it. We were also joined by 6 agency members, 2 clients, and 3 on-screen talent. And there was a technician from the car company in case anything went wrong. Now, day 1 was arguably the most expensive day of this production. And that was definitely because we had the AR that Ersin correctly knew that we couldn't really afford. Steady ops in the UK are the best paid technical roles on set. The good ones are all unionised as well, so there's no negotiating, and AR numbers are crazy high because that rig is expensive. So forgetting all the rest of the crew, kit hire, studio hire, catering, props and crafty, this alone costs an eye-watering £2,600 for just 1 day. That said, for the end result, I think it was worth every penny. Tommy, the operator, was up there in the top 2 best operators I've had the pleasure of working with, and imagine the alternative to shots like this. Yawn. Due to the budget being fully maxed out, we didn't have a first AD on this. So I put together a schedule, and for day 1, it looked like this. Breakfast was available for those that wanted it from 7:30. We were pretty much all lit from the day before, but the car needed a final clean, and camera, monitors, and a bunch of other bits needed to be sorted. So from 8 until 9, we had setup. 9 a.m, we started rolling on some sexy AR car B-roll. I knew we were going to need a ton of this for the edits, and we only had AR for this first day. We began with this to allow for talent and agency or client to arrive late. By the way, they didn't, but it's always something to be prepared for, in my experience at least. We all needed to wear these cute little blue booties to avoid scuffing up the easily scuffable white cove, whilst the DOP Callum worked with Tommy the Steady and the first AC to get a mixture of dynamic and more standard moves. I feel like some people can get carried away with the rolls when working with AR. So for every super dynamic roll move we had, I made sure we also had some more bog standard simpler ones in the can too. As with most car shoots, reflections were going to be a pain in the ass, but our creative brief was to lean into the behind the scenes on set vibe. So for the most part, reflections were just taken as they were, as cleanup in post was going to be limited. The immediate crew working on these shots were all on my Hollyland Solidcom C1 Pro Series headsets, so we could communicate calmly and efficiently without shouting across set. It also meant we could still have music playing for a nice, vibey, relaxed atmosphere to get the day started. The beauty of B-roll when no sound is being recorded. But then it opens up the whole room to everyone's unique and individual music tastes. I consistently feel personally judged by the crew no matter what bangers I put on set, which I hate because it opens me up to ridicule, and I honestly don't know how DJs do it. But I do know how editors do it. Well, at least how this editor does it. And that's using the sponsor of today's video, Audio. Audio has a huge library of music and have made all of the music offerings even more customizable with the recent launch of Elements 2, which allows you more flexibility across the parts of the track that you actually want. I'm downloading instrumentals 90% of the time for my own edits, and often the stems too. However, across a lot of music licensing platforms, You can't always get the exact parts of the track that you need, but now Elements 2 allows for studio quality separation of the stems that sound like the original master, as well as the addition of strings separation finally added, so you can amp up the Epic when needed. I normally use one of their time-saving AI-powered search engines like Hands AI to find the kind of track I'm looking for, and then I can either download the full track, the instrumental, all of the stems, or just a stem of my choice. Even if you don't plan on signing up today, you should definitely check out Audio via the link at the top of my description and see what they got to offer. But if you do decide to sign up, make sure to use code PETER70 at checkout for a whopping 70% off your first year of Audio Pro subscription on what is already one of the most affordable platforms out there. Back on set at 10 a.m, our first talent arrived. Another Tommy, which didn't not make things a bit confusing an hour later when he was on camera with our steady op Tommy. 11 a.m. till 1 o'clock, we were scheduled to shoot with Influencer Tommy, and 11 till 1:15 is when we ended up shooting. Because the creative brief was for this to be a little bit messy in a way, we intentionally had lights and studio clutter in a lot of the frames, and in amongst the sexy, polished car stuff, we also had a ton of handheld, natural and reactive feeling camera work to help this feel, that word that you may or may not have heard on set before if you're a director, authentic. 1:20 until 2:20, we had lunch. I said we had lunch. I had lunch for 30 minutes and then had been talked into helping our first talent member of the day, Tommy, a popular tech influencer on the interwebs, into filming with his camera for his channel. 2:20, we were officially back on. Now with our second talent, a model/actor who is big on the fashion apparently. To make this all work, I've got all the must-haves shortlisted in a document on my iPad, iPhone and laptop. Taking shots off as we go, and for the more floaty, fashion/beauty, less structured bits, I've tried to schedule each session in a way that will go fastest in terms of camera change time. So because we'd ended the session before lunch on the steady, we then began this next block also on the steady to minimize that changeover time, before going to the few locked off shots we had and then finally to handheld. In a dream world, we'd have had 2 cameras, but as always, budget is a factor. We ran a few minutes past our originally scheduled start time of 4 o'clock for our next setup and talent, but managed to catch up a bit on time, whilst I ran to the empty studio next door where our sound guy Rich had pre-rigged a small booth to allow us to record voiceover before the talent had to leave. All whilst back in our studio, they were re-rigging for AR again and turning the car around to face the way that we needed it to, which was honestly a real ordeal every time it needed to be moved so as not to ruin the White Cove. After a bit of faff from lighting, we were kicking off rolling on this just before 4:30. It was no mean feat, and I'll add that no department was getting to spend the full amount of time that they wanted in order to do the best job they could on this production. Lighting wanted more time to improve. Art wants to give the car another wipe down. Camera could do with a few rehearsals, and working with talent not used to being on camera, I could do with lots more takes at a slower, more relaxed pace. But with the amount of content we were capturing, we just didn't have that time. And it's only for socials anyway. That said, it can be hard to approach things like that when 90% of the people on set come from a place of pride and passion around their job and wanting to do the very best they can do. But there's so often just not the time, and this was very much one of those shoots. As we were going through this last piece, it dawned on me that it might feel a little dry and possibly a little too slow for social media, which is where it was going to end up. So I was quick to suggest to the creatives that we picked up some Edgar Wright style fast cut sequence moments to give it some pace in the edit and something to at least cut around. So we dropped some shots and added some more, not really quite having the time for it, in round 2 of the Sexy Car B-roll filming at the end of the day, getting out just 5 minutes over at 7:05. But before we move on to day 2, even though I wasn't the cinematographer on this, I wanted to speak to Gaffer Will, who often works with me when I am DPing on jobs, to talk about how we lit this all with what ended up being a lighting budget of around 8k, when really we needed closer to 30 plus.
Here's the final total for the lighting. £7,758.50 is quarter of the that you wanted. What's the thought process to get to where we got to?
Regardless of the budget, I always try and quote for a job based on what I want to achieve rather than what you want to achieve. There's loads of leeways that you can get into with rental houses in terms of, can we, give us all this lighting for so amount? So you might as well try.
I really liked this deliverable in particular because this one, its stuff is more hidden, but I love the stylized lighting.
I wish we had a bit more time with this one.
Yeah, I wish we had more time on all of them. The thing that we were kind of struggling with the most was this bloody softbox Originally, the softbox was going to be way more expensive than it was. You had to make a lot of compromises to make it work. What did you want to do and what did you compromise?
My kind of habit is to go to Sky Panels, fill a Sky top soft and go from there. So I had all the 6 Sky Panels pointing down in the middle of the soft boxes. We did a 12 by 24, I remember. And then around the corners, we had 600 Cs.
Now that you've done it, would you have got 600 Cs all over, or was that still the best thing to do?
I think just to get that extra push of light, I used up to pull the 600 Cs.
If we were to do the shoot again and budget wasn't an issue, what would you do differently?
If you look at some of the footage, you can see the seams in the silk. So I think I would get a custom 12 by 24 silk to go over so it looks nice and clean.
If we'd had a whole day for each video that we made, would have been amazing.
For what it's worth, I'm happy.
Yeah, me too. I am as well. But I can remember all the little moments where you were like, can I just? And all the stuff that you wanted to do was valid, but it was like, we haven't got time to just do that. I would love to have shot it as if it was a car ad rather than 6 or 7 fast turnaround videos.
You never know. One day we will get onto a, particular production, which gives us the time to perfect things.
There is some cleanup in some of these, but again, if we had bigger budget in post, I could have done more cleanup.
I mean, as long as you're happy with it, that's all that really matters to me, and obviously Changang as well. They're better.
Well, they loved it, as far as I know anyway. Without more resource, i.e. time or money, I don't know how you could do that any better.
Well, I appreciate that because it was tough. So I'm glad you said that.
And I mean it, William, and I mean it.
This video has turned into a bit of a beast, so I'm going to make it a 2-parter. But if you made it this far, please make sure to give the video a like below. It really helps the channel to grow. And if you want to see part 2, where things start to get a little hairy on set, as well as getting into the post-production and the money, then make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.